Hello everybody, I'm back, Dr. K.K. Agarwal, President Heart Care Foundation of India and Confederation of Medical Association of Asia and Oceania. Let's enjoy scientific feast with Dr. Anil Ganju, heads the Department of Dermatology in many prestigious institutions of Delhi like Sundarlal Jain Hospital, Saroj Hospital, a senior consultant dermatologist and laser surgeon par excellence. He is currently the president of SARC Association of Aesthetic Dermatology. He has been the vice president of IADVL India in 2016 and past president of IADVL Delhi for 2 consecutive years in 2005 and 2006. Let's enjoy the feast.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Agarwal, for that. So, friends, today we are going to talk about an important aspect of skin disease, the superficial skin infections, and the use of topical antibiotics in this difficult situation. So, looking at the management of skin and soft tissue infections and use of topical antibiotics in this situation. The burden of skin and soft tissue infections is huge. The infections of the skin are typified by invasion of the skin by various microbes, including bacteria. We're going to typically talk about bacterial infections today. They enter into the skin and can go deeper down into the lower levels of the skin and even the subcutaneous areas. And depending upon the depth that they go into, they can be simple infections, very superficial, sometimes deep infections, and sometimes life-threatening when they go into the bloodstream and produce things like septicemia. The burden on the humanity because of skin and soft tissue infections is huge, can lead to hospitalizations, surgeries, septicemias, and sometimes death also. The exact incidence of skin and soft tissue infections is difficult to assess. One of the estimated counts has been about 24 to 1,000 person years. The prevalence is difficult to assess also because the most of the skin and soft tissue infections are short-lived. They last for about 7 to 10 days unless they are complicated. So you cannot pick up the exact prevalence in the community. These infections are commonly found in community as well as in hospital environments. In hospitalized patients, an estimated prevalence was seen to be to the tune of 7 to 10% amongst the hospitalized patients. Furthermore, there is a huge concern of the rise of methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus infections amongst the community. This is called the community-acquired methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus infection. It's a huge concern because it does not respond to most of the antibiotics. And according to one of the surveys, the prevalence of the incidence of this the community-acquired methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus infection in the United States was about 243 to 100,000 population. Now, these community-acquired methicillin-resistant staphylococcal infections are not uncommon in our part of the world also. They are seen in the Asia-Pacific region also. A study estimated the prevalence of this carriage in our part of the world and found that the highest prevalence was found in India, followed by Vietnam and by Taiwan. Not only the infection, but also the carriers of this infection are a huge threat. Children aged less than 6 years and household contacts of the patients who are infected with this organism also are a huge challenge, and they are great spreaders of infection. The most common pathogens implicated in the development of skin and soft tissue infections include Staphylococcus, various Staphylococcus species, various streptococcal species, Pseudomonas, and Enterococci. On the whole, it's mostly the gram-positive organisms, particularly staph and strep, which are involved in the superficial skin and soft tissue infections. And then there is this rise of methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus in the community-acquired infections. Two types of populations are at risk. One is a group of patients who will have some predisposing factors, like they are critically ill, they are elderly, they are in an immunocompromised state because of different reasons, because of chronic disease, because of drugs, because of HIV, liver and kidney disease, vascular compromise, but both lymphatic and venous. All of them can predispose a patient to development of skin and soft tissue infection. The second category is the virulence of the etiological factor. So the more the etiological factor virulence, greater is the possibility of development of infection. Now, depending upon the etiology of the infection, the associated etiological agent will be different. For example, in patients of diabetes, the infection is more commonly caused by Staphylococcus aureus, by group B streptococci, anaerobes, and gram-negative bacilli. In patients of liver disease, Campylobacter, Klebsiella are more common infective agents. In patients of immunocompromise and neutropenia, Pseudomonas is a more common agent, and so on and so forth. Also, in IV drug abusers, the methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus and Pseudomonas are on the rise. Subcutaneous drug abuse, anaerobes are more common causative agents. Now, if we look at the skin as a barrier, it's a very resilient, barrier to various environmental insults that can enter into the body, which includes microbes, bacteria, fungi, viruses, etc. It's a very strong surface barrier to all these agents, and it is only on the breakage of this barrier function that colonization and invasion of the skin occurs with by these microbes. Most of these invading organisms are bacteria, and if you want to understand the kind of bacteria that are involved in colonization and invasion of the skin, we can divide the body into two halves, the one above the waistline and the one below the waistline. The infections in the part of the body above waistline are mostly caused by gram-positive organisms like Staphylococcus, like Corynebacteria, Streptococci, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, the infections below the waistline are caused by a combination of gram-positive and gram-negative. So if you have an infection in the upper part of the body, consider that it is gram-positive infection, and you are most likely going to do well if you use an agent that is effective against gram-positive microorganisms. These are the clinical, manifestations of skin and soft tissue infection. We have superficial infections like impetigo, which can be either a honey-crusted lesion kind of a presentation, or bullous presentation, the vesicular presentation, when it is known as impetigo bullosa, or impetigo contagiosa if it has crusted lesions. I'll show you some clinical photographs. Ecthyma is a deeper infection into the dermis, and which has predilection for the extremities, particularly the lower extremities, most commonly caused by Staph aureus, Staph pyogenes. Purulent infections of the skin like abscesses, like furuncles, like carbuncles, which are more common in diabetics, are caused mostly by Staphylococcus aureus. Cellulitis, which is a deep infection, goes down into the subcutaneous tissue and can be associated with systemic symptoms and bacteremia and septicemia, is mostly caused by beta hemolytic streptococci, less commonly by Staph aureus. Other infections like gas gangrene is mostly caused by anaerobes like Clostridia. Necrotizing fasciitis is caused by both Staphylococci and Streptococci. So these can be kept in mind when you are administering drugs for these situations, so that you can use an appropriate drug during these infections. Now, diagnosis is simple. It is on the basis of clinical evaluation, where you should have a high level of suspicion. And if you have a skin lesion which is tender, which is red, which is edematous, which is warm, and is associated with fever sometimes, then there is a high likelihood that the patient has a skin and soft tissue infection. Presence of signs like crepitus, bully, anesthesia, hemorrhage, all these add to your diagnostic criteria to make the final diagnosis of the infection. These are some of the clinical presentations, as I had already told you. Impetigo is a very superficial infection, particularly caused by streptococci, most commonly the impetigo contagiosa, this one, the yellow crusted lesions, particularly on the facial skin of children, and is caused mostly by beta hemolytic streptococci. Less common is the bullous variety, the bullous impetigo or impetigo bullosa, where we have bully or blisters on the superficial skin, particularly in children, more commonly caused by staphylococci. Ecthyma is a deeper infection which presents like this, usually on the extremities, particularly the lower extremities. It will present as a hard crust. The infection goes deep down into the dermis and heals with scarring. Pustular lesions like furuncle and carbuncle are infections of the hair follicle. Involvement of a single hair follicle would produce a furuncle-like hair. Involvement of multiple hair follicles would produce carbuncle. And these carbuncles are more commonly seen in patients with immunocompromised like diabetics. And then comes the cellulitis. This is infection of the deep skin and the subcutaneous tissue and can be quite severe and detrimental to the patient, sometimes associated with septicemia and more serious consequences. Now, we need to go to investigations, but not very often though. You can do blood cultures if you are suspecting septicemia. You can do a tissue swab and culture to make sure what kind of organism you are dealing with. You can do a needle aspiration of the lesion and subject it to gram staining, etc., or a culture. X-ray, ultrasound, MRI, etc., are reserved for more severe infection where you want to assess the deeper tissues. And blood cultures are particularly useful if you are suspecting bacteremia. X-ray or ultrasound can help you find out and explore the invasion and the depth of invasion of the infection. Sometimes you can find out the infection in the bone underlying the skin lesion when osteomyelitis can be picked up, although it's not sensitive or very sensitive or specific for picking up osteomyelitis. Sometimes you can see gas and gas fluid, air fluid levels in the lesion, which suggests a gas producing organism like Clostridia. This is seen in gas gangrene. Ultrasound can show you a fluctuance or a crepitus. You can pick up an abscess with the help of an ultrasound and treat it accordingly. And MRI is reserved for assessing deeper, soft tissue infections and abscesses, etc. Now, how do we manage these patients? Use of appropriate antibiotics is the key to the treatment and outcome in these patients. In most cases, the specific bacterial etiology of SSTI is unknown, but I told you what can be the pointers that can tell you what kind of an organism is involved. For example, impetigo, you have mostly streptococci. For example, furuncle, you have mostly staphylococci. So you can accordingly decide upon what antibiotic you have to use. But most often, the physicians are not very aware and they use empirical treatment to cover all the bacteria, and this leads to development of antimicrobial resistance, which is a huge problem. So this is a serious issue worldwide, and this is the reason of failure of treatment outcomes in most of the cases and high incidences of morbidity and mortality. As there is increasing resistance to systemic antimicrobial therapy, we often need to go to more toxic and heavier antibiotics. In this situation, topical antimicrobial therapy has emerged as an attractive therapeutic option. So wherever possible, try and treat the patient with a topical agent only. And as it has been seen that resistance to topical antibiotics is far less common than the systemic antibiotics. The topical antimicrobial therapy involves the application of the agent to the surface of the skin. There is absorption of the drug into the area of infection, and there are high levels of the drug in that area, which reduces microbial proliferation and minimizes the systemic side effects associated with systemic drugs. The advantages of topical antimicrobials are that they are able to escape the enzymatic degradation and clearance by GI tract, the first pass metabolism by the liver, because you don't have to administer it orally. There is less physical discomfort, which is related to enteral or parenteral administration of drugs, systemic drugs. There is decreased possibility of adverse effects and drug interactions, which we see with systemic drugs. There is an increased patient compliance because patients find it very convenient to apply the drug topically, and they are more, receptive to use of topical agents rather than oral agents, which they are wary of. Now, amongst the topical agents also, there's a constant rise in the prevalence of resistant strains, and there's a possibility of contact sensitization. So most of the agents, if applied over a long period of time, can lead to development of topical contact allergy or sensitization. So therefore, there has always been a quest to develop a proper and an ideal topical antibiotic, which would be selective to minimize the cross resistance, which would have a weak sensitization or allergy production potential, which would have a good penetrative property into the skin, and thus lead to development of adequate tissue levels at the site of infection, and would be available in several suitable formulation to suit the preferences and needs of the patient, of the area infected, of different anatomical sites like hair bearing area, like glabrous skin, etc. These are the commonly available topical agents. We have mupirocin, we have erythromycin, and we have fusidic acid, which has evolved as a very promising agent in the recent past. Fusidic acid is derived from the fungus Fusidium coccineum. It belongs to a unique group, the fusidanes, and its topical use as an antimicrobial agent in skin and soft tissue infections is well established. One of the best agent because of its narrow spectrum of activity against gram-positive bacteria. So because most of the skin infections are caused by gram-positive bacteria, so it's best suited for skin and soft tissue infections. It is one of the best agents available against the Staphylococcus aureus, which is the most common cause of skin and soft tissue infections. Besides, it shows in vitro activity against methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. It is effective against coagulase-negative Staphylococci, Clostridia, Peptococci, Petrococci, Streptococci. All these are gram-positive organisms, and all of them respond well to fusidic acid. Also, some of the gram-negative bacteria like Neisseria, Moraxella, and Legionella species respond well. The pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic studies have shown that it achieves very high concentrations in all the layers of the skin on topical application, much better than other agents like gentamicin and mupirocin. The place of fusidic acid in dermatology is well established in the treatment of mild to moderately severe skin and soft tissue infections like impetigo. I told you that's a very superficial infection. Folliculitis involving the hair follicle, erythrasma, also a superficial infection. Then furunculosis, then abscesses, etc. Infected traumatic wounds. All of them can be well taken care of by just topical application of fusidic acid. Now, how does it act? It has a very unique structure, so that ensures a good penetration into the skin. It has very low cross resistance and cross allergy with other antibiotics, so that is very useful. How it acts? It affects elongation factors. There are two elongation factors which are involved in the bacterial protein synthesis. Fusidic acid interferes with the elongation factor G in the bacterial protein synthesis and thereby does not allow bacterial proliferation. It is primarily bacteriostatic, but at high levels and concentrations that it achieves in the skin, it becomes bactericidal also. There are numerous randomized controlled trials which have shown fusidic acid to be very effective and bactericidal against Staphylococcus aureus particularly, including the resistant strains to penicillin, to methicillin, to ampicillin, to cloxacillin. So if Staphylococcus aureus is resistant to all these, it will respond to fusidic acid. In addition, strep epidermidis, Streptococcus pyogenes, propionibacteria, cornybacteria, Clostridia, all of them are very susceptible to treatment with fusidic acid. It presents a low risk of resistance even to methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. And in addition, one very important and useful attribute to fusidic acid is that the topical application is not associated with development of contact sensitization or allergy over long periods of time, which is very common with topical agents, particularly topical antibacterial agents like neomycin, etc. For the treatment of impetigo, most of the guidelines recommend initiation of only a topical antibiotic because it's a very superficial infection, and they particularly say that fusidic acid is most useful in this situation. A Cochrane review has shown that fusidic acid is as effective as oral antibiotics for treatment of superficial infections like impetigo. And of course, it has better tolerability than most of the other antibiotics. In one randomized controlled trial in 184 children aged 0 to 12 years who had impetigo, it was found to be much superior to placebo. Comparing fusidic acid with mupirocin, they seem to be efficacious, but fusidic acid is more acceptable because of the less greasiness it has in its preparation. Mupirocin is available in a thick ointment base, so it's not very acceptable and compatible and compliant with the patients. So fusidic acid has a favorable efficacy profile, favorable safety profile, does not have a sensitization potential, has a very, very low resistance profile, and the spectrum is very selective for skin infections, and so it becomes a treatment of choice for these skin infections. So the takeaway, friends, is that skin and soft tissue infections are highly prevalent. a diverse group of infections. The burden of these infections and the cost of these infections worldwide is huge. Now, topical antimicrobial therapy plays an important role in the management of these infections. This is particularly true because the systemic antibiotics are associated with high incidence of resistance. They have their disadvantages of side effects, drug-to-drug interactions, gastric bypass, metabolism, so the topical agents become very, very useful in superficial skin and soft tissue infections. Out of these topical antimicrobials, fusidic acid has garnered a significant attention because it has a very favorable safety profile, a favorable efficacy profile. It does not produce any sensitization, which is very common with topical antimicrobials, and has a very selective spectrum of activity against the organisms that affect the skin in the skin and soft tissue infections. These are some of my references. And thank you very much for your kind attention. This is a photograph of a Himalayan bulbul, which I shot just 3 days ago in Sattal. Just thought you would like it. Thank you very much, friends. Sanitization does not produce infective problems. It produces more of dehydration and development of eczema, particularly too much of washing of the hands. People have become more or less obsessed with hand washing. They have to be, a little judicious in washing their hands. We get hand eczemas very, very often these days because people have started washing their hands 20, 30 times a day. I think they need to wash judiciously, and they need to use less harsh soaps. Generally, they use antibacterial soaps like Dettol, etc., which is associated with more drying effect and more development of eczema. And sanitizers also, if the quality of sanitizer is not good, that also is going to wash away the important natural moisturizing factors from the skin, which dries the skin and causes more of eczema. So eczemas are very common because of this sanitization and excessive washing.
Number two is that 40%, large number of women say they are losing their hairs due to COVID-19. I mean, I'm related to the topic, but I want to cover some COVID-19 questions, taking advantage because all the viewers who are watching, they want to know some common questions related to COVID-19. What to do? They lose something like 100 to 150 hairs a day.
Sir, loss of hair after a illness is called telogen effluent. It's a very, very common post-viral infection sequelae. And COVID is also a viral illness. It is seen in many of the infections, but COVID, we are seeing a very, very high incidence. Almost every patient of COVID is coming in with complaints of excessive loss of hair. So we treat them as we have been treating general hair loss patients. First of all, they are to be assured that this is a very transient phase. They're not going to lose all their hair, and whatever hair they have lost is going to come back. It's only a transitory stressful phase for the hair roots, which is going to pass off within about 6 months, 8 months, or a maximum of 1 year. Even if they lose 100 hairs, 200 hairs, they're going to get some decrease in density, but ultimately it's going to come back. But having said that, we do give them, supplements like biotin, iron, zinc, etc., which although have not been proven to be effective, but do help them. We assess their vitamin D, B12, ferritin, iron status. And if that is deranged, we try to correct that. And we give topical agents like peptides, sometimes minoxidil, sometimes irritant agents, which help in strengthening the hair roots. But actually, it's a transient phase. Most of the patients, get out of it after about 6 months. A lot of people now are getting oral corticosteroids, and in fact, large segment of them are getting it with the post-COVID. They are getting it for weeks together. So, which are the conditions which can worsen if you take systemic steroids? Coexisting diseases which can worsen. See, one of the most important things that can happen is acne, particularly of the face, of the back. All ages who are taking long-term corticosteroids can have acne. Then they'll be more prone to skin and soft tissue infections also because of the immunocompromise that is associated with steroid administration. So these are the two things that can get aggravated in skin, amongst the skin diseases while taking steroids. What are the chances of developing a fungal infection when I misuse topical steroid with antibiotic? Huge, sir. Our major problem in dermatology these days is use of topical corticosteroids, leading to one excessive, incidence of fungal infections, and then recalcitrance of very difficult to treat infections. So they get modified.
They spread very rapidly all over the body. They are difficult to manage. The steroids produce not only decrease in the local immunity, but they also derange the skin barrier. They cause disruption in the normal skin, function. They cause stria. They cause thinning of the skin. They cause havoc, sir. And then because of the availability over the counter, all the patients try to avoid going to a doctor and pick up a steroid cream from the next door chemist, and then they spoil their fungal infections.
This is another question which has come is what is the comparative safety and efficacy of topical mometasone furoate with other topical corticosteroids?
Mometasone is quite an effective and efficacious topical corticosteroid. The problem with mometasone that we have seen is practically, although it has been placed to be a less potent corticosteroid compared to betamethasone, compared to clobetasol, but we have seen that it probably is very efficacious and it has side effects associated with it. So you have to use it very judiciously, if at all. And many of the anti-pigment triple combinations that have been used in our country have been containing mometasone, and they have really produced a lot of side effects because of excessive use and easy availability. So you can use mometasone at a particular situation, but it has to be used very, very judiciously, not for a long period of time, nothing more than 2 to 3 weeks. And then after every 3 weeks of use, you have to assess whether it has produced any side effects, etc.
Are there any alternatives to fusidic acid in children in SSTI?
Sir, I mentioned mupirocin is a good alternative. Although it used to be available only as an ointment earlier, but now we have a cream form also available. So the messiness has been taken care of. So that is a good agent also.
Before we end up and wind up, can you give 10 take-home messages for the people who are watching?
I mentioned that when you are looking at skin and soft tissue infections, you are looking most of the time at a gram-positive bacterial infection. So make sure that you give something that would be specifically active against gram-positive bacteria. Try and avoid very broad spectrum antibiotics, which generally we tend to use because we want to cover all sorts of infection. Use a very narrow spectrum of antibiotic, which is specifically and more efficacious against gram-positive bacteria. Try and avoid systemic antibiotics as far as possible. If you have a superficial infection, localized infection, then try and treat with topical antibiotics only, because topical antibiotics have a lot of advantages like avoiding systemic administration, avoiding systemic side effects, drug-to-drug interactions, etc. Do not use an antibiotic for a long period of time, not only because it can be associated with antimicrobial resistance, but also sensitization. Contact sensitization is very, very common. Let me tell you, we used to use a lot of neomycin earlier, and we have seen a lot of contact sensitization reactions to neomycin. So we try and avoid use topical neomycin now. So newer antibiotics are more useful, like fusidic acid, mupirocin, etc.
And my last question is, in COVID rash, anything specifically to be done? We are getting lots of different types of COVID rashes. Everything need to be done.
There are several rashes that can be associated with COVID. In the acute infection, you can get a morbilliform rash, a maculopapular rash all over the body. But then later on, you can get an urticarial rash also in the acute infection. But then we now know that thromboembolic phenomena happen, and they can happen in the skin also. You can get gangrenous lesions in the skin tips. You can get vascular occlusion in the skin, in the fingers, etc., or end arteries. So you have to treat the disease, the rash as it comes. For example, a morbilliform rash, if it happens, or urticaria, if it happens, is usually very short-lived. It does not cause any problem. So generally, we do not give any treatment for that unless it is really bothering the patient. If it is, then some kind of symptomatic treatment like antihistamine would be useful, or topical soothing agent like calamine would be useful. But if the patient has some thromboembolic phenomena, that has to be treated like a thromboembolic phenomenon.
So that was Dr. Anil Ganju talking to all of you with a very exhaustive presentation. I hope it covers all your questions. Still, if you still have some question, pass it on to us. We'll be happy to answer it. Thank you, Dr. Ganju, to be here with us. And we will be back with all of you in future with one more seminar as an academic feast. Namaskar, stay tuned.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you all.